Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Tim and Lake Region Electric Cooperative for inviting me to be a part of the panel today. First, I want to apologize for not being there in person. Unfortunately, an unavoidable commitment occurred for me today in the cities, and I do want to thank both Tim Thompson and Greg Larson for their patience and their accommodation. And I want to also thank the very kind person who is going to advance my slides. So why don't we go to the next slide? So, like Derek said, this is a really important time in our industry to have dialogues like this. This energy forum that Lake Region Electric Cooperative is hosting is just an excellent way to do that. And as you heard from Derek and as you'll hear from other panelists today, there is a lot that's coming our way, and the speed at which policies are changing, the speed at which they need to change. Many of us are putting a great deal of time and energy into understanding what it's going to take to make sure that this fleet transition that is occurring, not just across our state, but our region, that we can continue to deliver reliable and affordable service. And building transmission is a strategic solution to some of the challenges that we face as our generation is transitioning in our region. GRE has always been a long supporter of regional transmission buildout. We believe that it is the link for both reliability and affordability. So today, what I thought I would talk about is the transmission that's being planned for in the upper Midwest and even across the broader mid-continent and MISO region. And over the past few years, MISO, along with GRE and many of its other members and stakeholders, has been engaged in a multi-phase, long-range transmission effort. And it's resulted in a multi-phase plan to help deliver regional value over the long term while we continue to meet our near-term system needs. So why don't we go to the next slide? So I always just like to give everybody a quick snapshot of GRE transmission. As you know, GRE is an electric G&T cooperative in the state. We proudly serve 27 members, and they're all located in Minnesota, and the dark blue shading is our member territory. And when you look at the footprint of our 27 member distribution cooperative owners, they collectively serve about 60% of Minnesota geographically and some small parts of Wisconsin as well. So around 1.7 million people, as Jeff said earlier. And over the years, we have built a robust system for both our members as well as the broader MISO region. We've done our share there. And we've got around 5,000 miles of transmission, mostly in Minnesota and some in North Dakota, voltages from 41.6 to 500 kV. And the red lines that you see are GRE transmission. Yellow is some high voltage transmission that we co-own with other utilities. And green is the new regional transmission that we are co-owning and in the process of building. Next, please. And so while we've spent decades building a robust system, we do operate in a state that is a highly interconnected system. And what you see here are the lines of 17 other transmission owners. It just shows how interdependent our system at GRE is to the systems of so many other utilities in Minnesota. So our system, again, here is in red, and the transmission system of others is in green. And blue are our member boundaries. But while our transmission footprint is geographically large, it is incredibly intertwined with systems of others like Xcel Energy, Minnesota Power, Otter Tail Power, SMMPA. A large portion of our member load really does rely on the systems of others from a load serving perspective. An example is Lake Region. The area is highly dependent not only on GRE's system, but also that of Otter Tail Power system. And for that reason, we've established good working relationships with our neighbors so that we can continuously collaborate and plan and solve operational problems together. Next, please. So as we plan our system, it's not going to come as a big surprise to you that these are the principles that guide what we do for our members. The number one most important attribute of electricity is reliability. That is table stakes for us. And as we plan our system, we're guided by what will assist in improving our reliability, affordability, and sustainability. But we know we can't spend money and build a system that is 100% reliable in all scenarios 100% of the time. We know we have to balance reliability against affordability. And we have been hyper-focused on affordability because we have a number of members that serve customers in parts of the states that are the hardest to serve and in some of the poorest communities. And we're particularly focused on that as we're making significant investments to maintain reliability in light of some of the decarbonization goals that you heard about earlier. And of course, all of our decisions are against this backdrop of sustainability. And we don't look at sustainability just from an environmental stewardship perspective, which is important, but we also look at it heavily from a community engagement perspective. So these are foundational to our planning philosophy, which is build, plan, and build the right projects at the right time and at the right cost. And as we're in the middle of a transition, these values are going to become more and more challenging to achieve without the type of thoughtfulness that we all engage in. So next slide, please. So let me just focus a little bit on the load serving aspect of GRE's focus. Like many utilities and cooperatives, we are finding ourselves balancing the needs of our load serving transmission system along with what is needed for us to maintain regional reliability with the generation changes that are occurring. And when I mean load serving, I mean 69 kV and below. And the way we plan our load serving system is really influenced by some of the unique attributes of our system in Minnesota. So like I said, we serve around 2/3 of the state geographically, only about 20% of the electric load. And on average, our members serve 7 customers per line mile. So that does put affordability at the forefront. And our large, low density footprint means some of our members are served by radial lines. So depending on where they are, looping the system can be difficult, it can be cost prohibitive, and that can be a challenge for us. But like I said, we're heavily interconnected with 17 other transmission-owned systems. We know that our members rely on our system, but also that of others. And we also have aging facilities that are requiring some very proactive, intentional annual work. So while regionally, the need drivers for transmission are driven by generation plant retirements, interconnection of new generation, like wind and solar, system stability. More locally, our transmission needs are being driven by spot load growth that we see throughout our service territory. Our load growth is generally flat, but we've got certain places where it's growing or sometimes it decreases, which requires us to respond. It's expanding our lower voltage system because half of our system is, under 100 kV, and we're outgrowing the 69 kV system in our metro area. We're also hoping to upgrade that to higher voltages in certain parts of our footprint as well. And we know that the system has to get upgraded because we see a future where it will get more stressed with distributed generation and electrification in the future. So with regard to age and condition, our system is no different than many others. It was, much of it was built in the 60s and 70s, and we really need to look at upgrading and replacing it in the next 20 years. So this is just a snapshot to show you how we have to balance our spending on our load serving along with some of the regional drivers that we're seeing that are in play. So next, please. So you've likely seen this before, but as we look ahead, utilities and cooperatives like GRE are moving more toward a decarbonized generation fleet, which you've heard Derek talk about, and you'll also hear Zach talk about a little bit later. And it is not changing the fact that the electric grid has been described as the largest and most complicated machine ever built by man. In fact, we expect that the grid will become exponentially larger and even more complicated. Next, please. So as you'll hear Zach Rizicki from Great River Energy talk about this morning after me. Our power supply is becoming increasingly renewable. And as you look at GRE's portfolio, just at a high level, and he'll talk much about this a little bit later, in 2021 above, you can see the donut above, versus our projection of what our mix will be below in 2037. You'll see the increase in renewables and the decrease in dependency on more carbon-based resources, right? And this is not just GRE, and Derek alluded to this. This is a trajectory that we're seeing in the entire MISO region-wide footprint, which you can see on the right. So above, you see where the MISO membership and their energy mix is at in 2021. And then you go below and where they're at in 2042. So GRE is a member of MISO, and Derek alluded to MISO, where MISO engages in broad transmission planning, and we are a part of that process. They run the market where we buy and sell our energy, and it's a region that starts from up at Manitoba and all the way down the mid-continent of the US, down to the Gulf of Mexico. And so you see this generation trajectory of MISO over a 20-year period. And again, much of it is going to be replaced with wind and solar. And as this transition is taking place, the primary need driver for transmission isn't just interconnecting this new fleet of generation, it's making sure that we have enough high voltage regional transmission so that our members and their customers can actually get energy from all of the dispersed generation that we will see in the region, that we're getting it when we need it, and it's sufficiently getting to us 24/7 every hour of the year. Next, please. And there have been a number of national, regional, and local studies that have been performed in the last few years, and they all corroborate that a critical component of the energy transition and our end state is both more high voltage transmission and new technology, right? Technology such as long duration storage or other base load dispatchable type of generation resources that are carbon free. And these aren't the only studies that are out there, but these are ones from MIT, EPRI, ESIG, very influential in our industry, but they all have similar takeaways. And the common threads that run through all of these studies is more transmission is needed, and not just any transmission, large scale, regional, interregional transmission. Our grid today has really been optimized for more sub-regional intrastate transfers. Going forward, if we want to take advantage of wind and solar weather diversity, the grid has to regularly move large amounts of power across a number of states and between regions of the country. So the interdependency is growing. And both ESIG and MIT, through their studies, have said that without a large national grid, that is, an interconnecting grid among regions, customers could spend significantly more money trying to integrate renewable resources. So in addition to the transmission, these studies have said we also, if we're going to move toward a decarbonized grid, we really do need new technology that doesn't exist today so that we can make sure that we're filling the gap when there's lack of wind, lack of solar. It's got to have some reliability attributes the new technology does. Next, please. So, while there's been this drumbeat for more transmission, I just want to point out that over the past 10 years, we have been spending money on transmission. There has been growth in the rate base, the transmission rate base across the country. And that's what this graphic is just showing you, is we have spent dollars, but the growth has been flying under the radar, mostly because the investment has been in local reliability transmission projects. For all the reasons I talked about before, it's not been investments in sort of the big stuff like the large multi-state high voltage projects. which is really what's driving the discussion today to support decarbonization and the trajectory toward that. But rather, a lot has been spent across the country on local and reliability projects. For GRE in particular, it's been mainly on our 11569 kV transmission. Transmission owners in MISO over the past 10 years have spent over $25 billion on local reliability, more load serving, age and condition projects. We just haven't spent the kind of money and investment in these larger multi-value projects that go across states and provide regional benefit. But so over the past few years, MISO is has been shifting their planning toward those larger projects, which I'll talk about. Next, please. So given that we've had this resource mix that's changing in MISO and across the country, there is more transmission that's clearly needed, and particularly for us in the Midwest, which you can see on the red bar. So this is a chart from a recent DOE National Transmission Needs Study that shows the increase in transmission that's needed going forward. It's pretty Herculean, right? It's really to address the changes in generation resources, not just from additions, but from retirements as well. We need more capacity. We need to double the size of our grid. We need big wire, and we need a lot of miles. And what this study shows in the Midwest is we're essentially needing to double the capacity that our existing lines have. We will need to add a number of high voltage transmission facilities in Minnesota and the upper Midwest because we can't do it through just low voltage transmission additions. To just give you an idea, if you have 150 miles of a 765 kV line versus a 345 kV line, you can carry on that 765 almost 6 times the amount of power. And so we are putting a lot of energy at GRE figuring out the voltages that our region can take and working with MISO to see what is the best voltage as we think about some of the high voltage lines that are needed in the upper Midwest to make this transition successful. Next, please. So as we think about what's needed regionally and nationally, this quote is really spot on from Pat Quinlan, that to get where we need to be, we can't do it by building one line at a time. We can't build individual regional transmission lines separately. It's not going to create the super highway that we need to move energy from some of the remote generation locations to load centers. So we really need to make sure that we're planning a robust and optimized plan, and that we're looking at what can provide us with 24/7 energy sufficiency. So a much more comprehensive approach is needed going forward. And that's what GRE has been doing in our region with our regional transmission operator, MISO. Next, please. So MISO and its stakeholders and members have recognized that there's a number of factors in the transition that are creating the need to institute changes to make sure that we can maintain a reliable system. And what you see here is their reliability imperative. So this is the strategic approach that MISO is taking to make sure that they can create all of the market operational transmission solutions to prepare the region. They've recognized the pace of change is increasing. The pace of change is increasing, and they've recognized that there are a number of changes that need to be made in the long-range transmission planning effort, market operations, and other system enhancements. And so what you see on the left are the pie charts, the generation resources that are expected to change. What you see in the middle are the studies that they're undergoing to ensure reliability. And what you see on the right are the different efforts that are underway. And I'm going to talk about this long-range transmission planning effort. Next, please. So here, in that vein, here are just some details I wanted to show you about what's driving the development of regional transmission. MISO uses a scenario-based planning approach, and it's a tool that helps us look at what are the possible future events. So you're answering the question, what if this happens, then what? What do we do? So they develop different futures, and MISO and its stakeholders, including GRE, have created 3 futures. The one on the very left is the least aggressive. And the one on the right, future 3, is the most aggressive. And they all differ in 3 pretty significant ways. So we're looking at what's the degree to which utilities will meet their goals, what is the level of CO2 emission reduction, and what is the level of electrification, right? And depending on the levels, the output of a transmission plan will be different. And essentially what we're trying to do as we study all these futures is we're trying to figure out what is the least regrets transmission plan we can put in place, because most folks know that regardless of what scenario you look at, chances are you're going to be wrong. So it's best to do a least regrets approach. And you can see that on the right side of this, that clean energy goals aren't just coming from states or utilities, they're coming from both. And that is really making that is really contributing to the fact that this change is occurring now, and we really need to start getting ahead of it. But future 1 is the least aggressive future, and that's the future that was used to develop the first tranche of regional projects, which let's go to the next slide, and I can show you what that future looks like. So this is the least aggressive future that MISO is projecting, that the whole large tranche of 18 projects they approved last year is based on. You have substantial retirements of dispatchable resources, which you can see. You have generation additions that are coming from renewables. On the left, you see what existed in 2020 for capacity, on the very left. And on the right, you see what we're modeling for 2039. What jumps out at you really here is that the retirements over the next 20 years are all coal. Many of the new additions, 56 gigawatts, are solar or wind, and the resulting capacity mix is an even share when it comes to capacity of gas and a combination of wind and solar. So let's go to the next slide, and I can show you how we've been charting our course here with MISO. Is they've got 4 tranches or portfolios of projects that they're going to pursue. And tranche 1 is with that future 1, the least aggressive outlook is tranche 1. Tranches 1 and 2, which you see on the left side, are approximately what the assessment is between $10 and $30 billion, right? Tranche 2 will be approved sometime in 2024. Tranche 1 was approved last year, and Tranche 3 is really going to be projects only in the MISO South region. Right now, the projects of Tranche 1 and 2 are in the upper Midwest and the central parts of MISO. And then Tranche 4 is the connector project. So that will connect the MISO Midwest region to the South region, and it'll help increase the transfer capability between the 2 regions. Right now, there's a limitation of 3,000 megawatts north to south, and then 2,500 south to north. And so we want to focus on how we can expand that corridor. And when it's all said and done, MISO has said this could cost anywhere between $70 to $100 billion. Next, please. So this is the map of the 18 projects that were approved, and it's really considered by MISO as a first step. One of the most complex studies that was done by MISO in its history. It is well ahead of its peers in the country. It does make us proud. The work that we've been able to do is been quite outstanding in the upper Midwest and with MISO. And what you see here are projects in MISO North and Central. And this does allow almost 700 megawatts of capacity import. So Great River Energy is investing and developing and owning 2 of those projects that you saw in the previous maps. I just want to highlight for Tranche 1 that this will enable almost 60 gigawatts of new renewables. And a hallmark of this whole portfolio of Tranche 1 projects, all 18, is that 90% of the projects are using existing right-of-way. And that is a huge strategically important decision that was made, because we want to reduce the impact on local areas. We want to make sure that we can have shorter and quicker implementation timelines and reduce the overall construction cost. And the benefit to cost analysis for all of these projects as a collective was 3.6, which is a benefit to cost ratio of 3 to 4 times the benefit to cost, essentially. So this is the ownership that GRE has in 2 of the Tranche 1 projects, the Northline Reliability Project, and I do want to talk about a little bit of the need for both of these projects. That goes from Iron Range to Benton County to Big Oaks, which is right outside of the Monticello substation owned by Xcel to the east. And this is a critical north-south line, and it is planned to support system reliability. So it focuses on northern Minnesota reliability, and it is one of the largest regional projects that MISO has in its portfolio. We recognize the impact to both central and northern Minnesota with the generation shift, as we have more generation that's not only retired, but projected to retire. The surrounding 115 and 230 kV system is becoming weaker as we need to move power from the Twin Cities and southwestern Minnesota up north. So MISO recognized that during the winter, northern Minnesota load can increase pretty significantly, and it really does cause a strain on the broader 115, 230 kV system. So that disparity really spurred this project. The other project, and right now we are in the process of developing and getting our regulatory permitting together for this project. We plan to file with the Public Utilities Commission in a few months. And Alexandria to Big Oaks, which you see on the map, is the other project. And that is part of an existing CapEx 2020 project. And what we are doing with that is adding the second circuit. So they were built for double circuit capability, and we're simply stringing the second circuit on it. So it's a part of a broader project that goes from South Dakota, the Big Stone sub, to Alex, all the way to Big Oaks. But these are both projects that are truly needed for maintaining reliability as generation is also retiring. So all I'll say about this is, Tranche 1 is underway, 18 projects with a $10.3 billion price tag. Tranche 2 planning is underway, and we are heavily involved in this. And this is going to be a pretty complex, this will be a very complex study effort for us. Think of Tranche 1. It was historic, but by itself, it's insufficient to meet our decarbonization goals. It really just laid the baseline. Tranche 2 is what's really going to help us with future scalability and moving this forward. And I think I just spoke to that slide. I think we're on to the next one, please. Thank you. So, like I said, this undertaking for Tranche 2 is going to be a little bit more complicated. This generation mix that the projects will be based on is supposed to supercharge the generation fleet, right? So think of it this way: if Tranche 2 created that base system, then Tranche 2 is adding 2 to 3 times the renewables to the system. So a lot has changed in the past few years with the carbon-free standard, with the Illinois Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, with renewable goals in the IRPs. So MISO is really now supercharging that second future, creating a future 2A to account for all of the recent changes. And this just goes to the pace of change and how we're on a planning side trying to keep up with it so we can make sure that the right transmission really gets built out. It's just a rapid transition that is happening before our eyes. And so that leads me to my next slide, which is my final summary slide, that, there is a lot happening. The magnitude of the change is transformational, and it's really requiring all of us to work very closely together so that we can make sure that we can maintain reliability and affordability and achieve all of our goals. So with that, I know that was quite a bit, and I had to move at a quick speed, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Priti. Wow. This is huge stuff. Are there any questions? We can probably entertain a couple. I know Priti is not going to be here for the Q&A, so I think it would be great to perhaps get a couple of questions. I know there's one back there. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm Jason. I appreciate the presentation, Priti. My question is, how does GRE allocate transmission costs to their member cooperatives? When I was looking at the map of Tranche 1, I didn't see a lot of those projects benefiting Lake Region Electric Co-op. And so I'm just wondering, how does our cost allocated from transmission?
Yes. So first off, I would say that, even though a project like the Northline Reliability Project, Jason, doesn't necessarily land inside of the Lake Region area, the one thing that projects like that are really about ensuring voltage stability and other, power system fundamentals. When generation is retired, maintaining stability of the system is so important. And so I would simply say that projects like these, they work collectively. The regional projects, that whole portfolio works collectively to maintain both reliability, but then also appropriate transfer capability. So that's the first thing I would say. The second piece, going to your cost, it's a great question. When projects like this are planned, they are planned knowing that they are providing multiple values. So they're providing values to the whole region. The study and analysis of each of these projects shows that they provide a benefit of reliability, they provide an economic benefit, and they provide potentially a public policy benefit. So you might need a certain project to meet some public policy goals of some states. When they meet those criteria, then the project cost is shared by the entire footprint. So even though GRE and MP are building and investing in that line, we are not the only customers or members paying for that line. That line is getting paid for by all of the MISO Midwest and Central customers on a usage basis. So on an energy usage basis, that is the allocation of cost. So it's a great question, because these are not projects that will be borne solely by GRE. They are borne by an incredibly large footprint of customers.
Great. Thank you, Priti. And there's one more one question over here.
John is my name. My question in all the transmission issues and the comforts with that and the importance of that, in past reading about the Russian hoax and the electromagnetic impulse destroying or shutting down our entire system, what is being done for our protection in that arena?
Sure. So for EMP you're talking? Yeah, so EMP risks, right? So
yeah, I think that's right, Priti.
Okay. So just for those who may not know, EMP is usually, well, what it is it's an electromagnetic pulse that is can be caused by a nuclear explosion at a very high level in the air. And what it does is then the blast will propel electromagnetic pulses back to the Earth. And, it can look it can be similar to lightning strikes. They can have pulses, then you can have solar flares, and it essentially displaces the Earth's magnetic field. And so really what is at risk with EMP is it does, there is the potential of damage to really electronic equipment, right? So transmission electronic equipment. So usually controls or communication cables or protective relays. And so I will say that, things like EMP are difficult to protect against. When you think of what it will take usually it's in a substation, it's usually substation electronic equipment, to completely cage or protect every single substation becomes, it can be cost prohibitive. So you'd have to really put a cage around it that could take on that EMP impact. Some of the research that EPRI has done has shown that this is not necessarily something that could trigger a nationwide grid failure. What they have said is that if we did have an EMP event, it would probably create more of a regional outage issue, so a regional interruption of service. But that damage to large power transformers would be fairly minimal. And so what we're doing is NERC has an effort underway. We are participating in that effort to see what are cost-effective, but very good substation protections that can be put into place to mitigate some of these damages. So I appreciate the question. There's always quite a bit out there when it comes to EMP, but there's not a lot of easy solutions to it because it is so cost prohibitive.